Indeed, the fire will not touch a person who follows the Sirat al-Mustaqim. And it will not touch the one who is upon the Sunnah, who remembers, meaning that he is upon the straight path in the Sunnah, and he remembers the most merciful Ar-Rahman, and then weeps out of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is not a person who is upon the Sirat al-Mustaqim and upon the Sunnah who remembers Ar-Rahman and then his skin quivers from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except that his likeness is that of a tree that has leaves that are dry. So when the wind blows, the leaves fall away. So his sins fall away just as the leaves fall away from that tree. And verily, exerting a small amount upon the straight path and the Sunnah is better than striving hard in that which opposes the Sirat al-Mustaqim and opposes the Sunnah. The one who remembers Allah, my brothers and sisters, and the one who follows the Sunnah of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he is upon istiqamah, meaning that he follows steadfastly the straight path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made clear to all of us, the Mahajjatul Bayda, that clear white plain. And then he remembers Ar-Rahman, and because of his love of Allah and his fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his skin quivers due to that dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Such a person, his sins will fall away, just as the wind that blows onto a tree that has leaves that have dried. And the Ṣaḥābah radiallahu anhum, they reached that level, radiallahu anhum, where they would remember Allah and fear Allah and follow the Sunnah. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala reported in Fadail al-Ṣaḥābah with a chain of narration with the isnad that is sahih to Bakr bin Abdullah, that he said Abū Bakr radiyallahu anhu, the companion, did not excel the people in that he prayed more than the others or that he fasted more than the others. Rather, he excelled them with an affair that was in the heart. So the one who excels in the heart with khawf and mahabbah, with fear and love and tawakkul, and a person who is reliant upon Allah and depends upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that individual, alongside his outward acts of worship, bring him near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, up until a person, as has been reported from al-Ḥasan al-Baṣrī, when he was asked regarding the Ṣaḥābah radiallahu anhum, what is it with the Ṣaḥābah? What is it? Why were the Ṣaḥābah the best of people? Though some of the tabi'een, those who came after the Ṣaḥābah, would have more acts of outward obedience and worship than them. So he responded, the Ṣaḥābah worshipped, and the akhirah, the hereafter, was in their hearts. And those who came after the Ṣaḥābah, they worshipped, and the dunya was in their hearts. So this is how the Ṣaḥābah excelled. If we want to reach even a part of that which the Ṣaḥābah radiallahu anhum were blessed with by Allah, then our ibadah, our deeds and our actions And more so that which is in our hearts should be sincerely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we are mukhlis, that we are sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we constantly remember Allah. Just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, Allah has said, "O you who believe, remember Allah with a plentiful remembrance and glorify His praise in the morning and in the afternoon." And likewise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, and your Lord has said, "Call upon me, make dua, supplicate to me, and I will answer you. And as for those who are too arrogant, they are too arrogant and too proud and too haughty regarding my worship, then I shall enter," Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "sayadkhuluna jahannama dakhirin." Then they shall be entered. Allah shall cast them into Jahannam in disgrace. And that is because, my brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded you to call upon Him. Allah has commanded you to make dhikr of Him. Allah has commanded you that you remember Him in times of ease, and Allah will remember you in times of your hardship. So if they ask you, "O Muhammad, regarding me," meaning regarding Allah, then inform them that I am qareeb, I am near. And I shall answer the supplication of the one who supplicates to me, the one who makes dua to me. I shall answer him. So let them obey me. وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي, and let them believe in me. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ, so perhaps that they may be guided. You want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you, to give you Jannah, to give you paradise, then call upon Him and remember Him and obey Him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you that which you want. You want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you safety and security and goodness. You want a good family, you want a good wife, you want pious children, you want good health for your children. Then call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah will answer you. As He has said, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, for indeed I am close to you. So, O worshippers of Allah, O slaves of Allah, O servants of Allah, know that you are to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the worship of Allah is upon the tongue, with saying Subhanallah, and with praising Allah, extolling Him, by saying Alhamdulillah, and with takbir, by saying Allahu Akbar, and with the recital of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise, it is with the heart also, bil khawf, with fear and hope, and being frightened of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you have a right to be frightened of Him, because He is shadidul iqab, He is severe in retribution. And likewise with mahabbah, that you worship Him knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is to be loved, and He loves His believing servants. And with raja, and hoping in His mercy. And other than that, from the actions of the heart. And likewise with raghba and rahba and tawakkul, with desire and dread and reliance upon Him, all of them actions of the heart. And likewise that you are constantly seeking refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking Him to give you refuge from the evils of your souls and from your evil actions and from the evil that you see around you and from the traps of shaitan. And likewise ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you worship Allah with the outward actions upon your limbs, with your bodily limbs, kas-salat, jihad, such as prayer and fasting, and the performance of Hajj and Umrah, and jihad in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are constant in these acts of obedience, in ta'at, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of these actions, whether they are qawliya, fi'liya, qalbiya, whether they are actions of the limbs or actions of the tongue or speech upon the tongue, qawliya, or whether it be actions of the heart, those things in your heart, like love that move the heart. That's why they call actions of the heart. Because the heart is moved with love and fear and hope and dread and fright. These are the things that move the heart, and they are actions of the heart. So the dhikr of Allah subhanahu has tremendous benefits. And all of these are considered to be dhikr. The dhikr of Allah upon the tongue, the dhikr of Allah in the heart, the dhikr of Allah upon the limbs. All of these are ibadat, and they are also adhkar. They are also to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the greatest of all of them is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you are constant with them, with that dhikr. And that is the greatest of them. So the dhikr of Allah, and the greatest of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to make mention of Allah constantly. Remember me and I shall remember you. Be thankful to me and do not be ungrateful. And likewise the hadith Qudsi, Man dhakarani fi nafsi, dhakartuhu fi nafsi. Whoever remembers me in himself, I shall remember him in myself. And whomsoever remembers me in a group, then I shall remember him in a group that is better than the group that he remembers me in. Fawaid of dhikr. The hadith reported by Bukhari and Muslim. If you remember Allah, Allah will make mention of you. If you make mention of Allah in a gathering, Allah will make mention of you in a gathering better than your gathering. These are the things that we need to pay attention to, my brothers and sisters. The dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repels the shaitan and causes the shaitan to run away from the believer, from the worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because that shaitan and the army of shaitan, the army of Iblis, that shaitan that comes near you, that accompanies you, that whispers to you, then it is like a wolf upon sheep. So when you make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he draws away. Because the shaitan cannot stand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is glorified. He can't stand it. So if you make dhikr of Allah, he flees. If you don't make the dhikr of Allah, he will come to you and he will draw near to you and he will whisper to you and he will put temptation in front of you. Shahawat and shubuhat, lusts and passions that are blameworthy. He will put them in front of you. But when you make the dhikr of Allah, he flees. That's why the one who worships Allah 5 times a day, he is less sinful than the one, meaning in his deeds. Okay, the salah itself is a sin that is bad enough. But the fact that he does not pray opens him up to further sins, further types of crimes that are despicable and lowly. Because in the salah, you are making dhikr of Allah, you are making sajda, you are making ruku', you are gathering between all of those adhkar. Qawliya, fi'liya, qalbiya. On the speech, in the heart, and upon your limbs, you are making dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said what he said. That imagine if there was a river flowing in front of your homes and you were to walk out of your house and bathe in that river 5 times a day. Would there be any filth remaining upon your bodies? They said, no, Ya Rasulullah. He said, likewise is the prayer. Because the prayer purifies and dhikr in between purifies further. Because the one who remembers Allah, shaitan is distant from him. Those who commit crimes, whether it be theft or backbiting or fornication or listening to music, they're the ones who are the least of those who remember Allah upon the tongue, let alone in their hearts. And that's why you find the sinners the consumers of drugs, or the listeners to music, or the liars and the thieves and the crooks and the backbiters, that you find that they're the ones who struggle the most with dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and righteous deeds. But the one who remembers Allah much, he's constantly upon dhikr of Allah with the tahmeed and the tahleel and the takbir and the tasbih. Such an individual, you'll find, is distant from sins and less likely to fall into sins, because shaitan does not approach him. Because the shaitan does not approach him. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلِهَذَا, and for this reason, Allah described the shaitan as a whisperer who then withdraws away from you. And dhikri rabbihi. So he is a whisperer when the servant of Allah neglects the remembrance of his Lord. So when the servant of Allah neglects to remember Allah, what does he do? He draws near and he whispers and he comes close to him. And then he withdraws. When does the shaitan withdraw? Call the adhan and he flees. Say la ilaha illallah and he flees. Say and he'll flee. Because the shaitan hates that Allah is worshipped. And the servant who worships Allah and makes dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the shaitan does not want to be near him. That's why we make these adhkar in the evening, in the morning, throughout the day, after the salawat, in the salah, in surah. You look at Surah al-Fātiḥah in itself. Because the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you make the dhikr of Allah in terms of remembering Allah as an ibadah. Then you make the dhikr of Allah in dua. So the early part or the beginning part of Surah al-Fātiḥah that you recite in every prayer, the first part is the dhikr of Allah by way of the ibadah of Allah. So you're remembering Allah and you're glorifying Him. You're praising Him. Alhamdulillah. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. You're mentioning the mercy of Allah, the names of Allah. And then towards the end, you are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you to the straight path. And not upon the path of those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry with and led astray. Dua, even in the Surah al-Fātiḥah, and this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this such a tremendous chapter from the chapters, or a surah from the surah of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So remember this, my brothers and sisters, just because we are coming to the end of the Ayyam al-Tashriq, we are coming to the end of these days of Eid, and we have already passed by the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, which were days of dhikr and remembrance and takbir. And we were mentioning this over and over again for 10 days. 10 days are gone, quiet. Yet Ali radiallahu anhu, as it is reported from him, and the Ṣaḥābah radiallahu anhum, from Arafah, from the day of Arafah on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, after Fajr, after each of the prayers, he used to make the takbirat. Up until the last day of Tashriq, after Asr, he used to make the takbirat. And then we have the adhkar that are going to continue throughout the year. The morning, the adiyah in the morning, the seeking of refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these bring you closer to Allah and further away from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaitan will not come near you because Allah is protecting you. Why is Allah protecting you? Because you've called upon Him and He answered you. So call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has informed us in His book regarding those who make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But before I say that, let me preface it with something. The number of times that people come to us and they say, Ya akhi, or Ya ustad, I feel anxiety, I feel stress, I don't feel at ease, I feel tension, I'm always worried, I don't have that tranquility and ease in my heart. And some of you are sitting here today and say, well, I feel like that. My wife feels like that. I always feel anxious. I don't feel, I feel that there's something in me that isn't steady. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in His book. And that is because the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings tranquility. It brings serenity and it brings comfort to the heart. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَتْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَتْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions those who believe. That's the first condition. That you have iman, that you believe in Allah and you worship Him alone. You trust in Him and you know that He will better your affair. You know that. It is not the people of the world. It is the Lord of the worlds that will improve your situation, that will remove that hardship. And that is why iman is so important in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as though you see Him, but you see Him not. But you know that He sees you, and that is the highest level of worship. Ihsan. So that you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't associate partners with Him in worship. Certainly not major shirk and no minor shirk. That you seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that ibadah. So those who believe and whose hearts are ease, whose hearts find rest or ease in the remembrance of Allah. So with the dhikr of Allah, their hearts, they find ease and rest. Verily in the remembrance of Allah do the hearts find rest. You want rest in your heart? You want that anxiety to go away? Make dhikr of Allah. Dhikr of Allah with your tongue, with your actions, and with your hearts. Not just by saying, oh brother, iman is in my heart. That's all. So then you commit sins and you say, oh, iman is in my heart. No, the dhikr of Allah, as we mentioned, is in the heart. It is upon the tongue, and it is upon the limbs. But if the foundation is sound, and that is that ikhlas and that sidq, and that reliance upon Allah in the heart and the fear of Him, knowing that you're going to face Him one day, you will behave differently. If you know that you're going to face your Lord tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon, you will behave differently today. You will do everything in your power, in your bodily power, you'll do everything to rectify yourself between now and your meeting with Allah tomorrow if you knew that you were going to die. So why don't we take every day like that? Why don't we take each and every day and say to ourselves, I may meet my Lord before the day is out. Or when you go to sleep, as the Ṣaḥābah would do, that you would go to sleep thinking, I may not wake up tomorrow morning. So what am I going to do before I go to sleep? I'm going to make the dhikr of Allah. I'm going to make istighfar. I'm going to ask Allah to forgive me. Because I don't want shaitan near me. And this is how it should be. And the hearts that make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are trembling hearts. Just as Allah said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Allah said the believers are only those. When Allah is mentioned, they feel a trembling fear in their hearts. When was the last time you felt a trembling fear in your heart when Allah was mentioned? When was the last time truly that a fear struck in your heart when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was mentioned? And they are the believers. The believers are only those when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned, they feel a trembling fear in their hearts. And when His verses, meaning the verses of Allah, the ayat from the book of Allah are recited unto him, it only increases their iman and they put their trust in their Lord. That's the key to victory. That's the key to happiness. That's the key to success in this life and the hereafter. That you make your heart compliant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who are truly sincere to Him. That we are constantly remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts, upon our tongues and upon our limbs.